Welcome everyone to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast. I'm a networking expert and the author of the upcoming book, No Strangers, How to Build Community, One Relationship at a Time. My why is the pursuit of mastery, and the goal of this podcast is to lock arms on a lifelong mission of daily personal growth to become the best version of ourselves. So let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He is one of the most accomplished rock and metal producers of all time. He's won 3 Grammy Awards for his work with Peter Gabriel and Tool. He's worked with some of the most iconic artists of all time. Let's see how many I can name off the top of my head. I, Mother Earth, Stained, Rush, The Tea Party, Coheed and Cambria, Stone Sour, on, all these incredible artists, Dream Theater. It's such an honor to sit down with him here today. So welcome to the podcast, David Bottrill. David, how are you? And does it ever happen where someone reads off that resume and you think to yourself, man, that producer has an amazing resume, and then it dawns on you, damn, that's my resume?
Well, thanks for having me here, Joel. I appreciate that you got some great Canadian bands in that introduction, like I, Mother Earth, and it's not often that in interviews, that Canadian bands get featured like that. So thanks so much for doing that. And I'm happy to be here and answer your questions.
You're very welcome. So to give everyone an idea of how we came to be here today talking, I've worked at Metalworks for 7 years, or I haven't been there for a few years, but I was there for 7 years. Those that aren't familiar, Metalworks goes back about 40 years as one of the top studios in Canada. And while I was there, I was organizing different events, and we would have guest lectures where prominent people in the entertainment industry would come in and share some wisdom. And you were able to come in and talk and offer advice and insights for the students. And that's the first time we met. And fast forward, I started this podcast 2 years ago, and I started with a Mount Rushmore of who my all-time ideal guest would be. And I've had your name on my list for 2 years, but I thought, man, I got to build this up to be worthy of David Bottrill. So just a couple episodes ago, I had our mutual friend, Alf Anabolini. So he's now in the super group Envy of None with Alex Lifeson from Rush, and also an amazing engineer and producer. And when we're talking, I asked him, I said, hey, the list of artists you've worked with is incredible. Who were you the biggest fan of before working with them in the studio? And he named I, Mother Earth, he named The Tea Party, but then right away he said, but the person I was the biggest fan of was David Bottrill. And then I told him, I confessed, I said, I've had him on my list. Someday I'll get the cojones to ask him to be a guest. And Alf said, you know what, David's amazing. He's a great guy. I'm sure he'd be up for it. And I think the next day, your agent reached out to me, and she said, hey, we've come across the interview with Alf, and David would love to do it. And here we are. So this means a lot to me.
Yeah, we checked that one out when I guess someone put it up there with my name flagged on it. And, I'm really honored to have Alf say that, because I think the work that he does is really special. So we've actually worked on a couple of projects recently together. He's did some work with this artist Blackbird that I'm working with as well. And of course, the Envy of None, they sent me a couple of tracks just to kind of get my opinion, from an outside perspective. So I was happy to sort of just help out on a very peripheral level on that one too. And
he had mentioned, I'm a big I, Mother Earth fan, and you had done Quicksilver Meet Dream, and I believe he was involved a little bit in that project as well as kind of a fly on the wall in the studio.
Yep, for sure. That one, and also mixing the Blue, Green, Orange record too.
Oh wow! See, I didn't know that one. Yeah. So, So, man, we're gonna get into as much as we can over the next 2 hours. You have an insane discography. This is like the soundtrack to my life. So we're gonna choose some albums, some artists here or there. We'll get to the charity Make Music Matter, which I know has a very special place in your heart. It's very important, so I want to save time for that. Let's actually get started in the beginning. So people know David Bottrill, successful, worked with these artists, big producer, but let's go back to the start. You weren't born with these incredible ears and all this talent. So do you have an earliest musical memory, a time when music stood out to you maybe for the first time?
I think lying in bed listening to transistor radio, very quietly in my room, and trying not to disturb my parents. I got introduced really to sort of what would be now known as classic rock music by my older brothers and sisters. My brother had a great stereo, and he had Aerosmith records and Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and I would put them on and listen to them, and be like kind of scared but kind of excited too at the same time. And then when I'd go back to my room, all I would have is my little transistor radio. So I would record, like we used to do cassettes off of the speaker, trying to make sure you got it in after the DJ and before the DJ started talking, that sort of early thing. And it was all kinds of music. I mean, it was pop music from the Carpenters, or backed with, into Procol Harum, into, all kinds of these different things that you'd never know, or, even the Terry Jacks and Susan Jacks and stuff like that, just listening to pop music on the radio. And it was always really an important part of my life and, my time spent in my room.
How grateful are you now, looking back, that your brother had such great taste in music?
Oh, my brother and my sister, they both. My sister, they were members of the Columbia Music Club, remember? Where they would
you'd order 10 albums and 9 of them would show up incorrect. And
basically, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, they showed me the way for music, for sure.
And did you play any instruments at all as a kid? And if so, how did you gravitate towards those instruments?
Well, my dad went down to the local auction in Dundas and picked up an old Gerhard Heinzmann piano. It was an upright, and still to this day, I know it was kind of pokey, but it didn't have that. It had a great sound to it. Actually, it wasn't that kind of. Back in that era, there were those low half harp pianos that you would get from Simpson Sears or something like that, and they always had that sort of plunky kind of sound to them. This had like a real kind of barroom upright piano sound, because it was always kind of out of tune, and not exactly tack piano, but anyway, he got that piano, and I asked to get lessons. They didn't say, you have to take piano lessons. The piano was just there, and I said, look, my friend across the street was getting piano lessons. It's like, can I get piano lessons too? So I just took a couple of years, and then my brother introduced me to, he was a guitar player. So he said, he introduced me to guitar and learned how to play guitar when I was about, 11 or 12, and sort of, none of which I ever really became virtuoso on. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have been a great musician, but I don't believe that I have there's a certain intangible quality to musicians who are really great improvisers or good interpreters or whichever. I don't have that skill, unfortunately, and I kind of realized that fairly early on, that I would never be an amazing musician, but I always wanted to do something in music anyway. Luckily, I found a niche where I could use my love of music and my kind of understanding of it without having to rely on my very bad chops, of which there are very little.
Well, speaking of bad chops, did you end up playing in any bands? Were there some horrible band names?
I never really was in bands per se. We were in garage rehearsal band people.
You never made it to the stage?
Never made it really to, well, a couple of little things, but nothing of any consequence. No. I would have loved to. I loved playing with music, but it's funny. My friend group at the time, none of them, they were into music. None of them were into playing anything. And none of them, I was the only one who actually played an instrument at all. And so nobody was really interested in being in a band. They were interested in going to parties where bands were playing, but not being the entertainment.
So you're telling me that there will never be videos on YouTube that surface of you playing in a young band?
No, not in a young band. Later on in life, I did a gig with Peter Gabriel a couple of years ago at a conference here in Toronto, playing bass actually on that one, but nothing of substance. No.
That's funny. Not a lot of musicians would go from practicing in the garage and then when they make the stages with Peter Gabriel. So that's
well, I ended up learning like instruments as studio, stuff. So I learned to be able to play stuff in studio. And if I rehearse enough, I can hack it out, but I'm by no means any kind of special musician. I'm functional at best, I'd say.
Before you start to get serious about wanting to become a recording engineer, was there anything that you wanted to be as a kid when you grew up?
No, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I went to community college for a while in a just general business program. That really didn't appeal to me that much. And so I was kind of, as a kid, lost from a career standpoint. I didn't really know where I wanted to go. And it was the moment that I walked into the first recording studio I ever went into that I knew.
And if iPods existed back when we were kids, when we were 16, what would we find on your iPod?
Oh, well, I had Walkmans, so they were around. Yeah, I mean, I listened to all kinds of things. In my early life was, again, things like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, progressive things like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And then in the 80s got more into the Fix, or got into actually really a lot ska music, the Specials, the Selector, the Beat, in Canada known as the English Beat, things like that. They were exciting music. I was never a huge fan of the Pistols particularly, but I loved what they did to kind of up, the upheaval. The Clash, of course, were great. The Jam, things like that. That would have been sort of the development. But honestly, early on, my very first single 45 that I ever bought was the Carpenters' On Top of the World.
That's amazing. So we're about to dive super deep into recording engineering. Before we do so, what were some of the jobs you had before becoming a recording engineer? And is there one horrible job that stands out as the worst amongst all of those?
Well, I think I did a lot of things. I worked at a gas station in high school for years, pumping gas as a part-time job. That was great. The hours were perfect for after school. The people that I worked with, the mechanics and the boss, they were great people. So I liked that job. Two that were real clunkers for me. Well, I mean, we would do sort of part-time work at the steel mill in Hamilton, Stelco. We would clean underneath rod mills and do sort of just like picking up spare change on the weekend, that kind of thing. But my worst two, one of which was working for a moving company. I really, really hated that. They tended to overwork the young guys like I was at the time. So there was very little sleep and lots of heavy lifting. And I'm not a big person. So I credit it for me learning how to lift things properly. So it actually helped for later on in life when I was touring. So lifting flight cases, you learn to do that easily, and I can pack a truck pretty well. So that sort of thing. But I think probably my worst one was I was 2 nights of a overnight security guard in a truck parking lot, basically like a truck yard. And the first night I did, the guy pointed out that when I was going around to check the back of the trucks, I should grab a big piece of lumber just in case there was somebody back there. And the second night, I spent the entire night in the office and did not leave and never went back. So I was the worst night security you could ever hope for.
Did that produce any nightmares of what could happen if you stayed on that job?
No, because I didn't stay on that job. I knew right away. It's like, yeah, I'm not doing this. This is not my calling.
When we're young, we're often told to go to school, get a normal job. Was there any fear for you that you wouldn't be able to make a living in the entertainment industry as a producer?
No, not really. I mean, I had great support. So when I was just beginning college, when I was 19, my father died. And so it clouded my perspective for a number of years. So I carried on through my college program, again, not knowing what I was going to do, but my mother was saying, look, just finish college, try to, get something to fall back on. So I was, okay, I did. And then sadly, a great friend of mine at the end of college that I had made during my time at college, really interesting character who I really looked up to, ended up having a psychological breakdown and killed himself at the end of the third year. And that kind of, in a strange way, sort of woke me back up to be like, look, you're on a path that you're not going to be very happy with for the rest of your life. So you better find something. And even at that time, my family all said, look, you're going to spend a lot of time in the job that you're doing in life. You better enjoy it at least somewhat. So I started looking around of what things I could do. And my girlfriend at the time said, look, my uncle has a recording studio. She knew I wanted to do something with music. She said, it's got a recording studio down in Hamilton. Why don't you go talk to him, see what he has to say? So I went down and ended up doing an internship there. And during that time, there was, it was an unpaid internship, like they are very common now. They weren't quite so common back then, but I cut grass in the daytime, washed windows, cleaned houses, did anything I could to make a few bucks, and went down to the studio at night.
So I reached out to our mutual friend Alf to help me start off this podcast right, and I forgot to read the quote right off the top. So here are some kind words from Alf Annabellini. This is what he says about David Bottrill. Aside from nonstop amazing productions, which is obvious, his ongoing work with Make Music Matter may actually be the thing I find most admirable. It's not lip service. He puts himself out there and they change lives. Oh, and he's a great guy to hang with. So that's from Alf, just to set the tone for.
Oh, that's very kind of Alf.
So we're going to dive into the recording engineering now. Where did this love of audio come from? So you mentioned your family was always playing music, and you become a music fan. You get interested in instruments, but where specifically audio? I mean, most music fans don't turn to become an audio engineer creating audio.
Well, when I was a little kid, my parents were looking for things that would interest me, and they bought me one of those transistor radio kits with the great big soldering gun when it was a big gun, and I put that together. Never worked properly. But I had another radio that was working, and in the area that I was growing up in was a sort of new development. There were all kinds of new like telephone cables being put in, and there were a couple of these rolls of them that were just left by the phone company on in one of the properties, and it had all these wires in it. So I got these wires and I took them home and managed to get, I don't even know where I got them, but all these tiny little drivers, and I thought, this is great. And I put them all around my room, and I attached them up with this telephone wire that came all coming from my transistor radio. So I made myself a very mono, but surround sound little mini driver thing all around my room. And it was so much fun to listen to music in there. It was all in mono. I'm sure the phase relationship was terrible and everything, but it was a blast for me when I was a kid. So I don't know if that led me onto a path of engineering, because it was the worst possible signal path ever, and huge load on the whole thing. Anyway, it was a lot of fun to do. And then when I found myself going into recording studios and knowing that I really wasn't the greatest musician, I thought, well, look, you want something to do with music. Here's an area where you have some sort of mild aptitude or potentially an aptitude towards. And you can learn from these people, these engineers that are doing things. You can learn how to run a console. You can learn what microphones are doing. And that's a way you can have something to do with the music industry without failing because of your lack of actual musical playing ability.
And do you remember your first time being in a recording studio where you were actually working, whether it was as an assistant or an engineer? Can you remember the first time?
I think
I was going to say getting paid, but you don't always get paid as the runner or the.
I think one of my earlier sessions actually was with the band Shadowy Men on a Shadowy Planet. I was working at Grand Avenue Studios in Hamilton, and they came in. This was, I think, their first or second recording that they'd done, and it was being produced by a guy called Coyote Shivers. And
Good name. Good name.
yeah, he's in Los Angeles now. Anyway, he brought in this session of these guys, and it was all instrumental, and we set them up and started recording, and it was really exciting because the band was kicking ass, and it was primarily instrumental, kind of that sort of vibe. Anyway, it was a great time. So it was a great sort of first session where I was able to sort of learn as I was going along, but still get something kind of exciting at the same time.
And how early on did you realize that you had a skill, that you had something of value to offer that people could use, people would demand, and that this was something that you actually wanted to do as a career?
I think it generally came from the musicians that I had worked with. They'd be really grateful for the work that I had done, and excited by the sound of what we came up with in the studio. I remember there was this saxophone player called, I think, Ron Anderson, I think was his name. That could be wrong about that. It was very early on in my career. He was sort of in that sort of jazz group era in Toronto in the very early 80s. Great player, kind of at one point a very avant-garde style of sax playing. Anyway, we were working in the studio. I was recording him and on something. And anyway, he said something that was really nice. He said that what I had done to his sax to give him something to play around with from a treatment or an engineering standpoint, he said it was really sort of innovative, and that I told him that I had some other opportunities to go to, and he said, well, if you ever leave Canada, they'll be missing a great engineer. And so I thought that was a really nice thing to say, and it made me think, maybe I'm not too bad at this.
Can you share what your journey looked like as a recording engineer from those early days leading up to the work with Peter Gabriel? So I know that's a big span of time. You're changing countries. Could you maybe guide us through what that looks like?
Well, I started at the studio in '83, and as an assistant. I mean, as a T-boy, really, to start with. It was, cleaning toilets, making tea, setting up microphones, learning from the engineers, and even, working on jingle sessions, helping out some recording there or some late night mixing for jingle sessions, that kind of thing. And then, bands would come in that Dan Lanois was producing because it was his studio. It would have been Martha and the Muffins for one, Luba, Kowalchuk, the Secrets and Sins album that he did there. So, sort of working on projects like that, Parachute Club, sort of being an assistant, and then getting work with things like Shadowy Man or this band called Altogether Morris that was a young band in the Hamilton area, and just, kind of picking up some skills and working at it. And then, at one point, the Lanois sold the studio to Bob Deutsch, and Dan went over to work with U2 in Ireland, and subsequently Peter Gabriel in England. And he called me up and said, look, I might need somebody to help me out here, just as an assistant, more of a personal assistant to him. And I thought to myself, well, sure, I could do that. But, the moment I'm anywhere near a recording studio, I'm going in and I'm not coming out. Right. So basically he asked, would I come over to help with Peter Gabriel for a few weeks? And I said, yeah, sure. And I got on a plane. It turned out that the guy who was sort of the studio assistant at the time was not really interested in being a studio assistant. He was more of a live guy, more of a stage manager, production manager kind of person. And I said, well, look, I can take over that sort of job. And he was like, yeah, go for it. You do what you want. So I became the assistant on those sessions and worked with the engineer, who was Kevin Killen. And that was for the So album. So we were supposed to be there for a couple of weeks, and it turned out to be about 6 months to finish that record. And then at the end of it, Dan, we were then planning on going and doing a record with the Psychedelic Furs. But they didn't have any really songs fully written. And so Dan said, well, call me when you get the songs written and we'll maybe do something. his idea then was, well, I'll go back to Canada and see what he can find. And he said, if you want to come back to Canada with me, I'll find you some work, or we can do stuff. Or you're here in England already. Why don't you see, when you stay here, there was another month left on the apartment we were renting in London. Why don't you stay here? Or if you want, stay here and see what you can find. So I ended up doing that. Went back down to see if there was anything to be had at the studio in Bath with Peter, and there was all kinds of work to do, tape store, preparation for the tour, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it just transpired that I ended up going back and ended up working for Peter, and stayed there for about another 9 years working for him, and essentially 20 in England once I moved back up to London from Bath. So yeah, sort of in a fairly long-winded answer, that was sort of the path up to at least England.
It's crazy to know how one decision can just change the trajectory of your life. I mean, you go to the UK, you don't realize you're gone for 2 decades, right? When you first go.
I think life is like that in general. I mean, where we are sitting right now is the product of all of the decisions we've made in life.
So for our listeners, some of them aren't as musical as others. What would you say to you are the roles of a producer in the studio?
A producer does many things. It can be everything from sort of compositional assessment to performance assessment, but it can also be confidence assessment and confidence building. Some producers have a technique of tearing down the confidence of an artist to build them back up in their own image. I try to take the essence of what a musician is and try to bring the most out of them, of who they are. I will suggest compositional ideas. I'll suggest sonic ideas or musical approaches, and I'll assess the performances of those approaches. So it's multifaceted, but you do, as a producer, I think you have to fit yourself, you have to mold yourself into the position that's needed for whichever project that you're doing. Sometimes it's sitting back and really not saying much at all. During the last album I did with Mastodon, for example, when I was working with the drummer and the bass player and one of the guitar players, it was involved, and I'd have suggestions and I'd have things to say about performance or whatever. But in working with one of the other guitarists, it was more just like sit back and be a cheerleader and say, yep, sounds great, man, keep her going, you're doing great. You have to be flexible, I think, as a producer. At least the way that my personality works best is when I'm flexible and when I'm encouraging of an artist to create the best that they can do with the tools that we're given at the time.
So we're going to dive into the Peter Gabriel stuff a little bit. Before that, I have another quote that's sent in here, and this is from Rich Bedeau. So this is the drummer for Finger 11 and Saint Asania.
Sure, I know Rich.
So this is a little bit of a longer quote, but the entire quote needs to be read. So here it goes. David is a true master at his craft. The list of artists that he's worked with is staggering. Every band I know, when the "what producer do you want to work with" question comes up, David is always on the list. Although I haven't had the honor yet myself, that's yet, all of my favorite records were done by him. Not only will he get you the best tones of your career, but you'll get the best perspective and ideas to make your songs the strongest they can be. Then he will get that perfect take to make you leave the studio a better musician than when you walked in. I know this all to be true from many, many artists. Also, there's this. When I was at my lowest, in between gigs and not doing my best, David met up with me in Toronto and hung out and chatted about music. He may or may not have known I wasn't doing well. My guess, having the instinct that he has, is he did and was showing encouragement and support. Either way, it didn't matter. It helped me. David is a legend with a humble and kind soul and one hell of an ear. So that's from Rich Bedeau.
Wow, that's very kind. I'm humbled by that. I remember us hanging out, and I did know that he was probably not at the top of his game at the time. And I think in those situations, yeah, you can offer words of encouragement and just be there, even if nothing else, just to listen. Often that's the best thing a producer can do, is listen. And offer words of encouragement.
So with Peter Gabriel, you worked on So in 86, Passion in 89, Shaking the Tree in 90, Us in 92. And it looked like your role and your responsibility kept getting bigger as the albums went on. So with So, you engineered, then with Passion, you engineered and mixed, and then you produced Shaking the Tree. Did you feel like your skills were developing and that Peter Gabriel and the crew were starting to trust you more and more with more responsibility?
Yeah, I think I need to correct one thing though, Joel. The engineer on So album was Kevin Killen. I did some additional engineering on that, and I assisted for most of that project, or probably about 2/3 of that project. So I can't let that one go. Kevin was the engineer,
and you shouldn't.
engineer.
So that's good. Yeah,
and he's a fantastic engineer and a great friend. When it came to the Passion, that's kind of the one that I'm most proud of in the work that I've done with Peter. I think the Us album also I'm very proud of, but I think that the Passion record for me was something that it was such an amazing learning experience. Just from a musical standpoint, I was introduced through Peter and through making that soundtrack to musical styles that then later turned into work with Real World Records that I would have never really gotten as broad and as focused an introduction to all that music. So yes, over the time, of course, as you get more experience, Peter trusts you more to do different things. We developed a great relationship over those 9 years, and the more and more work that we did together, the more responsibilities I was given. So until the point when we got to the end of Us, and I felt at that point I'd kind of gone as far as I could with that relationship and in that position, and it was time for me to sort of branch out on my own. So that's why the relationship ended in that natural way at the end of a project. I didn't want to do any more touring. Peter wanted me to come out and tour and do the live sound for the whole thing, and I was just not comfortable with that. I'm not a great live sound person, so I felt it was that time where I'm ready to move on.
What would you say are the different skills needed between live audio and studio audio? I guess live is more of a chaotic environment where things change on the fly.
Yeah, I think for live sound, for me anyway, I think a short memory would be a useful skill, because I'm quite I don't know if perfectionist is the right word, but I love studio work because you're able to craft something into the way that you eventually, your vision tells you it should go in. And with live, I always found that I was, and this is probably mostly because of my lack of skill in it, but I was never satisfied with any of the live sound that I had ever worked on. And so I didn't want to have a time of being frustrated all the time. So I think that live engineers are amazing at crafting for the live scenario. You're forced into the situation of different venues. And at the time, there wasn't the digital consoles we have now, which have sort of instantaneous recall song by song. It's much more, the early preparation, I think, is key in that work now, and people are able to do that. And then going out and doing the show, it's fine tuning and fine tweaking. Maybe nowadays doing live sound would be okay, but at the time with analog consoles and to trying to fix it, those sort of problems every night, I would have been very frustrated to do that. And I admire deeply the work that those people do. So yeah, I think that from a studio standpoint, you're able to, go for take 2, go for take 3, refine the sound, move the microphone a little bit because it's just not picking up enough of the cone, or, those sorts of things. That's studio work. You can do that. Live, it's not quite so easy. It's like every night's a different thing, and every night's a new adventure. But I think I probably don't, I'm not patient enough to do that kind of work.
Hmm. So the Peter Gabriel album "So" comes out in 1986. It's a huge critical success, a huge commercial success, 5 times platinum in the US, all these hit singles. It shows up on the list of greatest albums of all time. How important was that album to your early bio? I'm sure that opened just a ton of doors.
Yes and no. I think that from a career standpoint, it's certainly a good thing to have on your resume, without a doubt. But for me, what I gained was the education of the recording education from Kevin and from Dan. Those obviously, yes, having it as part of the bio that you have, no question, it's a plus. But I did go fairly soon after that to Los Angeles to kind of see what, if anybody would take my meeting. And I didn't find that it was as much of an asset as I thought. It was an asset for sure, but I was pretty young. So they're still like, okay, what else you got? So it was only after a few more successes of things like that where people like, okay, he's the real deal.
I guess because you were assisting more on that album. It's once
Sure.
You got to engineering, mixing, and producing the Peter Gabriel albums, maybe that's where the Peter Gabriel name really stood out.
Yeah. The work that I primarily did on those for sure were yet another. The great thing if you have a resume that starts with a project and then you continue to do other work with that respect in an artist, then that will obviously show that person who is that respected respects you. So that way you're able to prove that, yeah, I did just this one project, but then I did these 3 others, and I wouldn't have done those 3 others if that person hadn't thought I was worthy.
I guess that's the equivalent of a normal resume where it shows you've worked at the same place for 5 years. That looks better than someone that's hopping around all the time. So
sure,
I've never thought of it that way, but I have another quote here, and this is sent in from someone and they actually talk about the "So" album from Peter Gabriel. So this is from a Grammy-nominated producer, Dan Broadbeck. So worked with the Cranberries and the Salads. When I was 18 and I took audio engineering in London, he came in as a guest lecturer for my class. That's how I know him. So this is what Dan Broadbeck says. "We've only met once at a dinner in LA in 2020, but we have many mutual friends, and I've mixed something for his Make Music Matter initiative. He's worked with a grad of mine, Darren McGill, a lot, and he speaks very highly of him. Funny story. At that dinner 2 years ago, Garth Richardson, who's also an amazing producer, was there at the end of the meal. Garth, who is a very good friend, asked for 2 Desert Island albums, and one was "So" by Peter Gabriel, and David engineered that. I'm not one to be a fanboy, so I didn't say anything to him about it, but it was quite cool. It was our last night at the NAMM show, and I was staying through the next week because of the Grammy nomination with the Cranberries. I have mad respect for David and the work that he's done." So it's Dan Broadbeck.
Thank you, Dan. That's very kind.
You made one of his favorite albums of all time, but he was too shy to say it.
I worked partly on it. Yeah, no, Dan and I, that was a lot of fun, that dinner. That was at the NAMM show. In fact, I think actually when we got back, my engineer and I, Ryan McCambridge, we went there, we came back, we both got very sick coming back from that. And there was no real information on COVID other than, messages that this thing was coming over from China. But we believe that it's quite possible that we had one of the first cases coming from NAMM. You go to NAMM, you always catch something, but this was particularly bad. So I don't know if we caught it at that dinner or somewhere else, but yeah.
As we move down through your discography, so you move on to working with King Crimson. So the album Vroom in 94 and Thrack in 95. What was it like working with these prog rock legends?
Oh, well, it was fantastic. Obviously, Tony Levin I had worked with before, and even Trey Gunn I had worked with because we did that David Sylvian and Robert Fripp project the first day. So I had worked with a couple of them already, including Robert. I found, it was sort of natural progression from that. Working with these guys was really exciting. It was such a funny introduction to Bill Bruford, because we set up in a studio in Woodstock, New York, and it was this small studio that we were kind of using more than the studio was really capable of. And so we kind of got in extra tape machines and extra consoles in order to do this, because the way they were setting up was as a dual trio. It was 2 drummers, 2 bass instrument players, stick and bass, and 2 guitar players. So I had to have enough inputs for 2 full drum kits. And, the drum kits that they had weren't small drum kits, so they were always quite big. But we were recording the first version. We kind of got set up, and this is the first time I had recorded them. And we ran through a version of Thrack, right? And so we got it all, we played it down one time. It's the first time I've heard this song. And I don't know if you know the song, it's quite involved. There's sort of a thematic thing at the beginning, an improv section in the middle, and then the theme at the end. Again, this is the first time I've ever heard this thing. So they come back in after the performance, and this is like a 7-8 minute piece of music, and we play through it. So this playthrough is the second time I've heard this song. So we finished the record, or finished the thing, and Bruford turns to me, he goes, "Oh, okay, great. But I kind of messed up here at the end theme here. Can from bar, I don't remember the number, X to bar Y, can you drop me in and drop me out of this?" Now, this is a drop in on analog tape of drums, in and out, which is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do and get right in a piece that's, let's put it this way, 3 different musicians are playing in 3 different time signatures. So trying to count what is one on any given bar. Anyway, in the process of this, I turn around and Trey and Tony are just howling with laughter, because they know this is the second time I've heard this intricate piece of music, and Bill's asking me to drop him out in very specific places. Anyway, I said, "Yes, Bill, I can, but I'm going to have to learn this to count it. So, let me play me through, show me where. And he did, and we did it. And I managed to get it in and out. I was pretty good at punching, but it was just, I got to count. You got to learn to count. What are you in? I'm in 15. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In. 1, 2, 3, out. And he was happy with it. Now, this was actually meant to be like a sort of pre-production precursor to the album of Thrack that we did, but it was still I wanted to make sure we got it right. So it was an exciting, stressful, potentially non-panic situation. We got it done in one punch, but it was very funny. I know Trey and Bill, Trey and Tony thought it was the most hilarious thing they'd ever seen.
I'm a Pro Tools baby, so just hearing you having to pull that off that's a nightmare to me. I mean, that sounds impossible.
Think cymbals, right? If there are any cymbals, you're dropping out in the middle of cymbals. How to get that without it sounding weird? I had the forgiving nature of 2 drum kits, so there was cover up, but the punch was pretty good, as I recall, and worked.
So when you have 2 different trios, you have drums, bass, guitar times 2. What challenges did that pose in the mixing of the album?
Well, it was difficult because you had to fit things around, like anything sonically. You've got to fit around. Now, the great thing was they would work out their parts so that they would interweave, right? And playing in different signatures meant that you were able to fit things in and around. But often panning was very useful. I mean, during one of the songs, it was like hard left, hard right with the 3 trios, because it's like, get it out of the way. But yeah, I mean, it was a challenge. A fun challenge. I mean, one of the problems that I did have was between the 2 drummers, neither of them wanted to be the small drummer, right? They both wanted the big drum sound. Well, it's not easy to fit, both big drum sounds. Somebody's got to be the rhythm, and somebody's got to be the melody in the rhythm part. So it's like, Bill, you're playing more rhythmic parts, and I'll get you as big as I can, but I can't make it as big as big thumping Pat Mastelotto, which was huge kind of sounds. Like, let's try and find some common ground here.
So you prefer to work with music that has strong identity, lots of originality. You've said that genre isn't that important. Where did this kind of ethos come from that you've lived by with the artists you've worked over your career?
Well, I think just because I'm a music fan of all different things, right? I love lots of different styles of music. So for me, it's really the integrity of the composition, integrity of the artist and the performance that matters, not whether it's rock or metal or progressive or singer-songwriter or atmospheric or ambient or whatever. As long as the intention is there, and as long as the integrity of the performance and the composition is there, I'm happy.
So your work with King Crimson, rumor has it that's what led to your work with Tool. That Tool was a fan of your work with King Crimson. Is that accurate?
Partially, yeah. Danny Carey was a big King Crimson fan, so he loved the work that I had done on Vroom and Thrack. Adam was a big fan of the First Day album that I did with David Sylvian and Robert Fripp. Maynard was very enamored, actually more by the world music stuff that I had done, the Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan music that we did with Real World Records, things like that, and the Passion soundtrack. I think Justin, being new to the band, he just heard the discography and thought, yeah, this guy gets great sound. So it was sort of threefold, but King Crimson certainly played a large part in why Tool wanted to work with me.
So that led to working on 3 different Tool albums. So I always have trouble pronouncing the album names, but Onima, is that how you? Onima?
That's how Maynard says it. He's the writer,
yeah.
It's Onima for him.
I've been saying Anima before, so Onima in 1996. Is it Salival or Salival? Salival 1999, and Lateralus, I can actually say 2001.
Lateralus.
Jeez. Tool never makes it easy.
They don't
make Lateralus.
They don't. Lateralus. That's the way Maynard says it. So he wrote the words.
Well, now we have in recorded history, we now know how to say the three album names. So
at least that's what it was at the time. It may have changed now. You never know with Tool.
Yeah. Man, I'm a huge fan. Anima is in my top 10 albums of all time. These albums are iconic. These are genre defining. These are some of the most critically acclaimed. Rolling Stone has Anima as the 17th greatest metal album of all time. When you're recording this album in 1996, do you know that you have something special here that could change things?
Yes, of course. You always know. No, of course you don't. It's look, again, I go into these things when we sat in the rehearsal for Tool. It was they brought me over, said, because I don't know if you know this story, but when they called, I didn't think they had the right guy. I thought that they were thinking of somebody else because I'd never done like an LA metal band at all. And so I thought, well, they probably think I'm somebody else. So I told my manager at the time, I said, don't really pursue it that hard, because, I loved the Undertow record. I thought it was great, but it wasn't anything that I had any experience with. So I thought, well, don't. But they called back in a week and said, no, we know who he is, and we really want him to hear our music, our new stuff. Can he come over to Los Angeles? So I went over and I sat down beside Danny, which was a foolish move because it's very loud, and listened to, they played through the whole album. And when it came to the end, I was like, yeah, that's great. I love it. I'd love to work on it with you, but why me? And they all explained that thing. They said, look, we want to make something that's not just going to sound like every other Los Angeles metal record out there. We want something unique. They said, we know what we want from the metal world of sounds and what we can get. What we want you for is your perspective on all other kinds of things and bringing that to our music, and sonically bringing that so that we can make something unique. And so when we were making that album, I brought my sonic sensibility, musical sensibility to it, married it up with theirs, and we came up with something that was unique to the sound of metal in music from the West Coast styles. So we didn't know that we had something special, but I knew that from the work ethic and from the ability and musicianship of the players that were there, that we were making something special for sure. I often think that of records that I work on, some hit and some don't. But I usually try to get involved in records where I know that the people are really talented and are great writers and great players.
So that album won you your second Grammy Award, the first one being with Peter Gabriel for the album Passion. Man, most people will never get a Grammy nomination in their life. You've won 3 Grammys, 2 up to this point in the discography. What is it like winning a Grammy, and what do those awards mean to you?
They're very special. I find it kind of funny that I feel like I have ones from opposite ends of the spectrum, because the Tool ones are obviously for best metal performance, and the Peter Gabriel one is best new age performance. So it's kind of,
that might be the widest gap in Grammy win history.
Exactly. But you know what? What I love about that is I think it speaks to the breadth of my catalog and the idea that I don't work on one style of music, I work on many. And so having recognition from both of those things, I feel is important. So I'm very grateful for those things. We were nominated for one with the Godsmack record as well, and just recently the Mastodon record got a nomination as well. Didn't win those ones, but it's it's very cliche to say, but it is nice to be nominated. It's nice to be recognized by your peers as being as having value. I mean, I can tell you a story about meeting up with Robert Plant and Jimmy Page. I grew up as a kid listening to Led Zeppelin, and after I did the Anima record, the Page and Plant was about to do their first sort of record together, and they gave me a call. Their manager gave my manager a call and said, "Would you come for a meeting with these guys?" Well, of course, I was shitting bricks because they were musical heroes as a kid. So I go in. I'm living in this little apartment in Bath, and I go up to. I'm actually working on a project at another studio near London. So I go over, and I'm sitting in Bill Kirbishley's office, who was their manager at the time, and I'm sitting on a sofa that's bigger than my apartment. Kind of perched on the end, and they're listening to the Tool album. We're playing it, and Robert's kind of walking around and listening to the music and saying, "Well, the vocals are a little quiet," and because in Tool it's more about the whole bound. Anyway, Jimmy's not saying very much, but I'm in awe of these guys, of course, because I've actually met Robert years before that in Bath. He was down in Bath. Beside the point, I'm sitting in a professional situation with 2 of my musical idols, and this is I'm
2 of the greatest of all time,
and I'm terrified and thrilled at the same time. So the meeting ends, we decide maybe we'll do something together. It doesn't go any really further than that. And I'm leaving the office, and as I'm walking out, a guy called Doug Boyle, who's a guitar player, happens to be in the same office, and I've worked with him. It's like, "Hey, Doug, how you doing?" We stop, we chat for a second. Then out of the Kirbishley's office comes Jimmy Page, kind of sort of jogging out. He's like, "Hey, Dave, can you wait a second?" I'm like, "Yeah," because he wasn't saying very much, but he came up to me after. He said, "Look, I didn't get much of a chance to speak during that meeting. I just wanted to tell you that I thought the music that you played me was really great. I thought it was really great work that you did." And man, that was like a month of me walking on clouds, because a musical idol of mine had said to me, "I think your work is really good." And that was as affirming to me as anything I've ever had in my career. So I can't remember exactly what your first. So getting the Grammy nominations as well are a same sort of affirmation. I know it's sort of like it's self-congratulatory in the industry. Pat yourself on the back. Aren't we great? We all got Grammys. But it is a recognition amongst your peers that your work is valuable. And so I am honored to get those things.
Do you keep those Grammys somewhere special?
I have the things up at the cottage, up at my cottage, and I don't put them up in my regular thing to look at or publicly display them that much. It's just not in my nature to be showy. I've got a few records up in my studio here, not too many, just because studios kind of should have those. But I mean, I've got Peter's The So album because it was my first platinum one. So yes, I'm very proud of that. I've got some Silverchair stuff up and Tool stuff, but again, not very many, just a few here and there. Just
Is Tool the band that you get asked the most about? And are you tired of Tool questions, or does it have a special place in your heart that the world just loves something you worked on so much?
Yeah, it's certainly what I get asked about most. But again, I'm very proud of the work that I've done. And, not everybody listens to every podcast and every story that I tell. So, I'm happy to answer questions to a certain degree. I mean, I prefer the good questions, like, a question like, what's so-and-so like to work with isn't really an interesting question, So, it's not something that you can really chew on as an answer. It's like, they're great to work with.
The Tool albums have lots of instrumental tracks. Some are musical, some aren't musical. It's more sounds. I'm curious where those come from. Are they there to evoke a certain emotion more than anything? Are they there to help create kind of the vision that the band has for the album sonically? I'm just really intrigued by the interludes. And I know it's, all the Tool fans are curious about how things fall into place with the band and with the album. So
I think the interludes are there from the band perspective, and I can't speak for the band, of course, but they want the album to flow in a certain way. And sometimes if you want to have song A coming after song B, they might not work very well as a transition. So having something in there leaves the album in its order that you want to tell the story, while making a little musical bridge in there between the two, so that the album will still have a flow, even if two songs that might not work well directly together because of key or because of a jarring nature or stylistic differences. You can have a bridging little interlude that sort of does a palette cleaning, and then you're on to the next thing. That's my guess with it. Again, can't speak for the band. They might have different reasons.
When I listen to Tool albums, I frequently find myself trying to count the time signatures. And I frequently think, if I was the engineer or the producer, how much a nightmare it would be to try to program the click track. And you've mentioned before that they don't use a click track. Is Danny Carey a human metronome? What's going on here?
The band worked together and create the tempo together. Yes, Danny sets it, but they work together. They move together. They're one of the few bands that I've ever recorded that really do. Like, they rehearse together so much and work together so much that they move the tempos themselves. And if I ever need a click, then that's programmed afterwards, not before. They don't do tempo maps. They do their own. And honestly, they're one of the few that, as a producer, I'll say, yeah, sure, we can do that. With other bands, I mean, they just the skill level of Tool is really beyond most that I've ever worked with. So they're able to cover that. A lot of bands think they can but can't. So I'm all for trying, but it's not like the feel of bands. Somebody like Tool, they can create the emotion and the feel of it with their tempo, but they move together. Like I will have done. I remember one time with a session with Tool that I was doing. We were doing one song, and there was quite a long break between the end of the drums and the starting of the next section. And I said, oh well, I'll work on programming a click for that for Adam to do to come in with guitar. And he's like, no, don't. I'm okay. And it was long. It was probably a good 3 or 4 bars of break. And bang, he came in right on. Like, he just knew that, but you can't do that with everybody. There's so few people that can actually cover that. That band can.
Yeah, every musician in that band are world-class at their instrument.
No question.
It's incredible. So I've heard you mention in interviews before that Adam is kind of a genius when it comes to guitar tones. Like he's very much a perfectionist in getting the right guitar tone. Can you elaborate a little bit on what it's like with him finding those sounds?
Yeah, it's great. He's see, he has it's not really what he does from pedal based. See, I think I respect him as a guitar player as much or more than any other guitar player that I've worked with, because his attention to the detail of his pick work, his tonal work on his instruments themselves, like he will have the way he gets like lesser driven tones is just usually like turning the volume of the guitar down. So he will audition 10 potentiometer volume controls in his guitar before he'll select the one that he wants to use, because there's a real feel to what he does with that. And his pick strokes and his angle and his hand position and the way he hits and where on the string, the precision that he does that with in order to get exactly the right tone that he wants. Like he works on that. And it's not about shredding. It's not about a million notes a second. It's just the unbelievable technique that he's developed over his many years of playing that gets his tone that no one else gets, the consistency of that tone and the just the amount of, I don't know, it's the precision and clarity of his tone comes out of his fingers. It comes out of his fingers, and to a certain degree the technology, but it's only like he's selecting the right technology for the way that he plays. So that's the kind of respect I have for him and his ability and his attention to that kind of detail.
Can you remember the first time you heard the iconic bass riff from Schism?
Yeah, it was in rehearsal. Yeah, and it was like, this is cool. Okay, and like you, I was like, how do I count this? Okay, and I figure out the count. It's like, oh yeah, oh that's cool. And it was very much. I mean, the lyrics weren't written yet, fully at least, so I didn't really hear the lyrics. I just heard the instrumental track, but I thought, yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that. It's funny. I wouldn't have picked that necessarily as a first single necessarily. Then I thought it was an odd choice, but it's like, okay, you guys know more than me.
It turns out that someone knew what they were doing, right?
Of course,
that was a massive
song,
massive album.
Of course, no, I know the album. I thought the album. See, here's my thinking about the difference between those two albums, both of which I'm hugely proud of and think are equally great. I just thought that the Anima record was more of a collection of great songs, and the Lateralus was just a great big piece of amazing work. I know it's a bunch of songs, but it's more of a mood of the whole thing than Anima. Anima is a collection of amazing songwriting and amazing performance and song and individual songs put together as an album, whereas Lateralus is kind of like it's one of those ones you can't really portion off one song or another. It's just, it is what it is. It's a thing.
Yeah, man, Tool has maybe the most diehard fan base on the planet. It's like, what other band can go 13 years between albums and still be number one in arena shows? And it's crazy, but
they're an enigma, that band, for sure.
Yeah, it's a blueprint that nobody can copy, for sure. And so within the hardcore fan base, there's so much kind of lore and myths and stories surrounding Tool. No one knows what's true, what's not, but it's all a part of what is Tool. What is the image of Tool? So one of the biggest things of lore in Tool, in the Tool fandom, is the Fibonacci sequence in the song Lateralus. Hopefully I said that right this time. Was that something actively discussed in the studio, or it's something that just comes out afterwards and maybe people are looking too far into it? I've heard Maynard talk about it a little bit before, but
yeah, he developed that lyrical rhythm to the song based upon the Fibonacci sequence. Yeah, so we discussed that, and he said, I knew what the Fibonacci sequence was before, and he said, I'm writing a lyric with this rhythm, based upon this rhythm. And because the way that the rhythm of the song went, it managed to fit perfectly with the changes in the song and how we wanted to write it. So yeah, it's definitely that's as far as that goes, I believe. I've heard stories of the whole album being based upon the Fibonacci sequence. I never heard that myself. Maybe they did, but if they did, that wasn't discussed. but the lyric of that and the phrasing of that song was at least in part based on the Fibonacci sequence.
The song Ticks and Leeches is considered one of the greatest recorded drum performances of all time. It shows up on all these lists for drumming. How much fun was it to record those drums?
I mean, it's fun to record all of Danny. He's just such an amazing drummer. I think he's, in a lot of ways, he's the best drummer I've ever worked with. I mean, Manu Katché as well is a great drummer. Obviously, Bill Bruford and Pat Mastelotto are great drummers. Danny, for some reason, just has this unique ability to be lyrical and, groove like crazy, and the parts he writes and his precision with it and the way he hits and the consistency with his parts and consistency with what it's done is he's one of those special musicians that you only get a few chances in life to work with, and I'm very grateful for the time that we did get to work. So Ticks and Leeches was just another performance in all of that. I don't separate them out that, oh, that track was really great to record or this track. They all were. He's such a special musician. It's great to record special musicians.
Sometimes when you see a movie where there's things that happen with animals at the end, it says no animals were harmed in the making of this movie. I'm curious how many drum kits were harmed in the making of Tool albums? Are there just punctured skins all over the place?
No, you see, this is a misconception. Danny doesn't break drums. Danny, I think, more like massages drums and gets the tone, because it's not all about how hard. Sure, when he needs to hit hard, he hits hard, but it's not like we were changing drum heads for every take, right? He can play loud, he can play soft. It's not all thunderous. Some of it's thunderous. On the Anima record, in fact, when we recorded that, we set up a PA behind him, primarily because of the electronic sounds that he would play. Because I thought, I don't want the electronics to sound like they're disassociated with the drum kit, because he plays it all as one performance. So I put the electronics out through the PA so that they would be captured by the room mics as well. And then I thought, well, why don't we do this a bit like a live thing? I'll add some direct mics in. I'll add the toms in. I'll add the kick and snare in. See what that's like, along with the electronics. Well, it elevated the whole drum kit. I mean, if you listen to the PA by itself, there was probably more electronics in it, but they were all being recorded, and it all gelled the sound of the whole kit together, which was what I was looking for. So, I don't think it's fair to say that, it's all thunderous and he's breaking drum kits or breaking heads. It's he's very respectful of his drum kits, and even the one that's made out of all cymbals, right? That drum kit. But he's such a great musician. He plays loud, he plays soft.
Did you happen to see in the last 2 years since Fear Inoculum came out, there was a live performance video of Danny Carey performing Numa that was sponsored by Drumsticks or a drum company. So it's the camera is on him for the entire performance. And this got like 20 plus million views. The whole world was like, what is happening? And it just shows like all four, like both hands, both feet are all doing something different. And it makes no sense that a human brain can keep track of all that. Did you happen to catch that video? Because it's insane.
I haven't seen that. I'll go look for it.
I'll send that.
I mean, I don't.
Well, you already know what it's like.
I know what he's like. I know how incredibly talented, and he would train. I mean, he's a musician and an athlete. I mean, drummers are athletes too, right? So he would train for that. He would train, and he would practice. I mean, this is the thing that Tool does more than any band that I've ever seen, is they practice. They practice together all the time, and they write and they work and they deconstruct, reconstruct, and they practice and they work on their parts until they know exactly what they're going to do.
The last thing I would say about Tool is that album that just came out a couple of years ago, Fear Inoculum. I love that album. I think that is up there with the best albums they've done, which are the ones with you. I think they're going as strong as they've ever gone. Do you have any comments on the new album at all? And man, every song is 10 to 17 minutes long. There's just 7 songs. They take you on a journey. It's unbelievable.
I think it's a natural progression for that band as to what they're doing. I think all their albums are great. You know, I think the ones that I did are great. I think I really respect the ones that they've come up with since 10,000 Days and Fear Inoculum. They're both amazing pieces of work by extremely talented musicians. So I mean, I'm just, because I know the ones that I've done better, I just know them better, so I'm more partial to them. But I think that they keep evolving as a band and keep pushing forwards. And they keep pushing forwards what is acceptable for, you know, a rock band in the world that we live in to do. So I'm happy to endorse any of their work, because I think, you know, they're one of the unique bands of my generation, and are you know, have a strong enough fan base that they're able to, you know, take a long number of time to develop a new record, and their fans stick with them, and that's rare these days. And you know, I'm proud to have been involved in that part of their career.
So with the pandemic, all concerts shut down for 2 years. The first concert I saw once things opened up again, I'm in Ottawa. I went to Montreal for Dream Theater, which is a band. You mixed an album back in 1999. So Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. That's considered one of their best. It shows up on greatest guitar albums of all time. So you mixed the album, and in the end, they went with 4 of your mixes, and later on, they release an alternative mix album that had all your mixes, I believe. What was it like mixing that music? And with all the again, we're talking about all-time great musicians between Tool and Dream Theater. How do you find the right place in the mix for such complex instruments and parts?
Yeah, it's hard. They're all in that band. It's all very busy playing. So it's finding a way to, panning is obviously one, tonal control is another. You have to carve out tonal differences between the sounds so that they can each speak when their moment is, and balance. You know, you have a moment where something is more important, the other things take a back seat. You have to ride that constantly in a mix. Like, that's more important, this is more important, this is taking the feature, this tone is too big, now we have to thin that out for this sound to come through, that sort of thing. So they were great to work with. John, you know, was Petrucci was kind of taking the lead at that time in the band. You know, they were, I had a little mini battle with Mayung, because there was a section of the song he wanted chorus on the bass, and I was never a big fan of chorus on the bass. I relented at one point, but yeah, no, they went with Kevin's mix. I think this was a time period when everybody was, you know, doing a lot of compression, a lot of limiting, making things very loud. I wasn't sort of so much into that. I wanted to breathe more, a little bit more dynamic. They wanted a more kind of upfront, harder hitting thing for Kevin's, and it's a great mix too. It's just a different take on the music. So I knew that they had released one with all of my mixes. I don't know what the sort of balance of opinion is on that, but.
So how is it decided if you're going to produce a project, engineer a project, mix a project? How is that decided? Some bands, you do everything. Some, I guess maybe they've already produced with someone else and then they just want your great mix. How is that decided?
It's usually what the people want. I mean, I don't generally engineer just engineer things anymore. Either I'll get hired as a producer or a mixer. So if they want, sometimes I'll just get hired as an executive producer to sort of listen to the demos or listen to the things and add sort of musical suggestions, or sit in on rehearsal, help develop things, and then somebody else will take over. It's all dependent upon what the client wants. So if they want me to produce, then I can produce. If they want me to mix, I can mix. If they want me to do both, I can do both. If they want me to do just, you know, executive production, I can do that too. So it's just a matter of what the client wants. And when they seek you out, they have an idea for what they think your role will be, and they'll ask.
Is there a preference at all between the two? Like, in a perfect world, if you're going to work with a band, would you hope to produce and mix, or do you enjoy it one versus the other, or are they just all skills that you offer that people are looking for?
I like variety. So I enjoy doing all of those jobs. and I like the fact that I do different versions of them. If I were just to be doing one thing all the time, I think I would get bored. Like if I was just doing mixing for everybody all the time, as nice as it is, because I just come in, this is also my home, my studio, so I'm able to stay at home, do the mixing, go do something else. That's great. But I do like to get my hands dirty and dive into the trenches with a band with a full production. So, it's again, that often requires traveling or doing lots of things. So I like to have a balance of those two things.
So we have another quote sent in here. This is Glenn Milcham, the drummer from Blue Rodeo. So this is what he has to say. I've only worked with Dave on one project, which was with Ensign. Am I saying that right? Ensign Broderick, aka
Ensign.
Jason Ensign.
Broderick.
Ensign Broderick, aka Jason Snyderman. He was super pleasant and chill, and easily one of the most fastidious producers I've worked with. I was particularly impressed with how he had each song mapped out bar by bar with notes on particular things he wanted to hear from each instrument. He was very efficient, yet patient and respectful to the musician, with no ego in spite of his impressive CV, a real gent and a consummate pro. Glenn Milcham, Blue Rodeo.
That's very nice of him to say. I just saw Blue Rodeo the other night. Went to go see them play in Hamilton, actually. Yeah. Oh, Glenn was great to work with. He mentioned my, it's like charting. I've sort of developed over the years that I learned. I started from Dan Lanois. He would have books and he would, take notes. And so I developed, sort of stole that technique of I always have notebooks. I've got a million of them laying around. And when I get the demos for a band, I will chart out the song, but I don't chart it out on musical notation paper. I can read, but only like remedial note reading. So I do essentially just little boxes, and the boxes have different shapes depending upon the time signature of the thing. And I've developed it over the last sort of 35 years to where now I can map out the whole song. I can take notes on the side, write chordal, progressions inside the boxes. It's just a way that I've developed that I can communicate music to me. So I can listen, I can look at the page, I know where I am, and I know what I want to have done at that point. So I can write notes. I can also use it to assess performances. So as I'm going down instrumentally, it's like the guitar is doing this. Okay, well, I've got some notes coming down, and I'll know when the whole thing's finished, because my memory's not so great, never really was. So I like to know from a visual standpoint, we've recorded this guitar part and it's all done. We're all there. If I don't, sometimes I've gone back early in my career, I would go back in a project and go, oh, we never recorded the second chorus with that guitar. What are we doing? This is the days before flying stuff around was so easy, right? So it's like you'd have to call them back in to play it again. This way, you know from a visual standpoint what jobs are done and what are not.
In 2001, you worked with Muse on Origin of Symmetry. You recorded 4 songs, 3 of which ended up being singles. And then there was an overlap in schedule between the Tool album and the Muse album. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, there was a little bit, but it was as much as anything that they were on tour. Oh. So they came in a time frame where they were in the midst of a tour. So we went to a studio, recorded those songs, and then they went back out on tour again. So
okay,
there was 2 conflicts.
Got it. So there's a question sent in here from Serge Menard. He asks, given this was so early in Muse's career, what was your greatest challenge making a 3-piece sound so good? It seems normal at this point of their career, but that album, although not their first, really set that standard for great sounding 3-piece.
I worked with sort of smaller bands before. I think it's just a matter of like the musical ideas that Matt Bellamy would have, and the sort of fullness of the tone of both the drums and Chris on the bass, the way that they filled out that area, that you can get a big sound from a 3-piece, as long as, I mean, they're not dissimilar to the way Rush works, right? They're able to fill out sounds with different, bigger parts or more like added things that they can play live, because they don't usually play the track too much. Like Rush never plays, very rarely plays to any track, maybe the odd like Subdivision's vocal or something like that. But other than that, they're able to create this because they have great musical ideas that cover all the spaces, and you don't feel unsatisfied. So yeah, we worked very hard to develop like interesting parts and interesting approaches to things, so that it didn't feel like an empty sound.
So Muse is known as such an amazing live band. I've heard that you had the band record together to capture that live sound energy. Is that true? And how do you keep the sounds separated when recording, if everyone's recording together? Are they in separate
Isolation
rooms?
booths.
Isolation booths.
Isolation booths. And nowadays it's a lot easier, because you can really utilize for recording purposes. You can record DI for a lot of, and then reamp things, so you can get a lot of isolation. It's great when bands can play together. I only do it though with bands that are really great at playing together. Otherwise, younger bands are often really not as experienced. They're not as good at working together in a studio being a more an intimidating environment for young bands. So that this way, I will say, okay, well, let's go in and let's focus on each instrument so we get it all right and you're comfortable with what you're hearing. Whereas if you're a younger band and you're trying to play through a song and somebody messes up in the middle, it can become a frustration. Whereas more experienced and more skilled musicians, you can play them together and they can get that band feel.
So this album was a big hit in the UK. I because of the label, I don't think it was released in the US until several years later, and then became, it's done well since then. Could you have predicted while recording this album that band Muse would go on to become one of the biggest bands in the world for the last 20 plus years?
Yeah, actually I could. And the reason is this: I saw them play in London before we worked together. I went to go see them play at this little club called the Monarch. Now, it was a small venue, smaller than, like, we're talking back room of the Rivoli kind of. Do you know that place in Toronto? Small venue, nothing of any size. And they were playing that show like they were playing Wembley Stadium. They were playing not to the back row, they were playing to 3 streets over. Right. And I asked Matt about that afterwards. I said, wow, you guys are really, you put on this big show. He's like, I'm aiming for this big show. It's like, if I don't play it now, I'll never be able to play it. So I'm going for this. And he was driven as a musician and as an artist. So I knew that either it was going to be huge or die catastrophically, one of the two. So I could have predicted that.
So back then, Muse was signed to Maverick Records, which is Madonna's label. And this is rumor. Rumor has it that when you guys completed the album, that they weren't happy with how much falsetto that Matt was singing, and they wanted him to go back and somehow change the melodies so he wasn't singing so high. The band refused. They got dropped. That's why it's only out in the UK. They signed with a new label. Is that true, or is that just rumor?
I can't speak to that. I wasn't involved in those conversations, so I don't know.
That is fair.
I mean, I think the problem was that at the time they were being compared quite heavily to Radiohead, which I mean, I don't think is really fair, because they're really not the same kind of band. But anybody who would sing up in that register would immediately get compared to Tom York because he sings up in that register. It's like anybody who sings with a high voice in rock gets compared to Geddy, and it's like Coheed and Cambria, right? Which the bands are really nothing alike, or very little alike, other than they both have guitars and high voices, but that's it. So I don't know. I find it. People are lazy often when they come to these comparisons, and they don't listen to the nuts and bolts of the music. They just hear a high falsetto voice and go, "Oh, well, it's just like Tom York and Radiohead." And maybe that was the concern, that would be too much of a competition. I don't know. Anyway, I think Muse, of anybody, have carved out their own unique identity within music. So I think whoever thought that might have been a drawback were wrong.
Yeah, they've gone on to sell 30 million records. I think the record label made a mistake there, possibly. Some musicians have this aura around them of genius. Someone like a Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, Maynard from Tool, maybe Dave Grohl from Nirvana, Foo Fighters. I kind of get that feeling with Matt Bellamy. Is that an accurate statement that he just oozes this musical genius, different instruments, the live performance, such grandiose vision of what's possible?
Yeah, I agree. I think a big part of my role during the recording was to make sure that Matt would complete one idea before he went on to the 4 others that he had within the process of overdubbing one part. So, it was really as much as anything to keep him focused, to finish the job in one. It's like we would be in the middle of a guitar overdub and he'd be like, oh, I want to do this thing on the world, so hang on. So it would be plugged in. Yeah, okay, we'll play that. And I'm like, okay, get that idea down. Now let's go back. Let's finish this guitar, and then we'll go over there. And then in the middle of that, he'd be like, oh, but I want to do this. Yeah, I think that he has, as much claim to musical genius as any of the greats that I've worked with.
Sounds like he's just oozing with ideas and creativity.
Yeah, for sure.
So in 2002, you work with Mudvayne, the album "The End of All Things to Come." It seems like you're just working with bands that have absolute world-class musicianship. Is that something that stood out to you about Mudvayne? Is that each of those musicians are just incredible musicians?
Oh, for sure, really great. I mean, Greg, obviously great riff player, but it's funny how he kind of ends up being almost like the sort of the rhythm bass player in that band, and Ryan ends up being the melody player because he's such an incredible virtuoso on bass. Yeah, again, a group of super talented musicians and a great singer. Same sort of thing. It was just a different flavor because Mudvayne so much had their character by the fluidity of the bass sound.
When I was 17, I did a road trip with my parents from Ottawa to Toronto for Canadian Music Week, and I saw Mudvayne. I was 17, and this unknown trio band, they looked like teenagers, opened, and it was 3 Days Grace. So nobody knew them at the time. A few months later, maybe, I don't know, a year later, I Hate Everything About You blows up on radio. They've been one of the biggest bands since then. So I got to see this double bill with 3 Days Grace and Mudvayne. And nice. Man, Mudvayne, I remember the lights came on, just blinding white lights, and everyone kind of has to turn away. And then the lights go off, and when you look, the members are all on stage in their place, and then they just dropped into the songs, and it was like breathtaking.
Yeah, very exciting live for sure. They put on a great show. It's quite an assault what they do, but in the best
assault on
way.
The senses. Yeah. I always wanted to ask you because you've worked with these bands that are so complex and so intricate and such amazing musicians. Is it ever intimidating going into a project where a band's going to do this insanely epic album with crazy epic songs with very very intense parts, crazy time signatures? Is it ever intimidating before starting a project, thinking like, how am I going to capture all of this into one package? And do you ever just think, man, I want to go record a straight up pop artist that's going to do 3-minute songs, 4 chords? Do you ever think that, or is that just me?
I think I attract to myself the kind of band that has intricate parts and intricate compositions. So it's not really intimidating to me anymore. At the beginning, which would have been really the King Crimson or something like that, but I mean, I kind of grew up doing music like that already. So it's not really been anything I ever overthought. It was just like, okay, well, here's a song and it's this length, and let's see what the best way is to record it. And let's record it and get it down and mix it in the way that all the important parts, you can hear them very well. So yeah, it would be fun to do something different in the sense of simplicity. But I would probably want to fill it up with a few things because, that's sort of what I'm used to. But yeah, having something simple and non-complex would be fun to do.
Someday. So I have
I just don't get those calls, Joel. Nobody calls
I
me
feel
to
like
do
it's
these simple things.
self-inflicted pain with all these
A little
super
bit,
difficult
maybe.
projects. Yeah, yeah. You're a glutton for pain in the musical realm.
Well, people look at your history and say, well, he does that. So, okay, let's call him.
I have another comment sent in here. This is from a Juno Award-winning engineer mixer that's worked with Olivia Rodrigo, Jason Mraz, Snoop Dogg. So this is from Vic Florencia.
Oh, yeah, Vic.
So he says, David, we all know him as an awesome engineer, producer, mixer. Besides having great ears, he has a wonderful heart. He's always eager to share his wealth of knowledge and offer advice. I'm honored to call him a friend. He's so good, it's ridiculous. Now back to us figuring out the whole Atmos thing. LOL. Was that Dolby Atmos? Is
that's it? Yeah. So Vic and Ryan and I, we've been spending a bunch of time trying to work out the Atmos mixing, and I did an Atmos mix for the Mastodon record that I just did. And so we're all fairly new at it. It's pretty exciting. It's kind of like the Wild West, where there's lots of different standards and nobody's really figured out exactly how it's supposed to go. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to mix in Atmos. You get a lot more dimension to work with. So and yeah, I mean, Vic's he's becoming a master at it. So I was up at his studio the other day and he was playing me some stuff and it just blows me away. He was so good. So yeah, he's way ahead of me on that for sure. I'm trying to catch up. I'm one of the old guys now, trying to catch up to the young bucks.
Is that what we're hearing with spatial audio? Is that the same thing or no?
Spatial audio, I think, is a different format. I think that's more of a Sony format. Atmos is Dolby. So I believe, I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but I think spatial audio is more of a Sony thing, kind of like VHS Betamax kind of thing.
And this is different.
Atmos was developed by.
Okay, and this is different than surround sound. So this is a different thing.
It is surround sound. No, it's surround sound. It's immersive audio. So it is. There are speakers everywhere, but it translates as well to binaural in just stereo headphones. Apple iPods do the proper one that even is sort of location based. So when you turn your head, the music stays there, kind of thing, which is a little bit weird for me. But they do the binaural, so it translates to binaural 5171. And then full Atmos. The system kind of, in a magical way that I only so much understand, seems to know what your playback situation is and adapts itself to fit that playback situation.
So you from there you work with Silverchair. So Diorama in 2002 you produced and mixed. Young Modern 2007 you mixed. And I remember when Frog Stomp came out and the band members were like 14 years old and everyone was looking for the next Nirvana. And we're talking about musicians that seem like musical geniuses. I feel like Daniel Johns is in there as well. And the band going from kind of the grunge start to, around Diorama, there's a lot of different sounds coming in and some orchestra stuff. And it seems like they really expanded their sound. And then by Young Modern, it's something completely different. I actually just listened. He has a new album that just came out recently, like maybe a month ago. He has a new album. So all these years, I mean, how long has that been? That's been like 30 years. How did you come to work with Silverchair?
So I would agree with you that Daniel is in that camp of musical geniuses. I think, again, exhibiting the strengths and some of the weaknesses, unfortunately, of people that have that ability. He approached me through his manager, John Watson, great guy. Because they wanted to make something that was going to be challenging to his audience. So we sat down, we had a meeting, and he told me what he wanted to do. And essentially it was, he had in mind to make his version of Pet Sounds, right? He wanted to do his defining record. And when he played me some songs and we discussed it, and I heard his conviction and I heard the quality of the music that was being written, I was excited to be a part of it. So it was again them knowing the history of what I had done, seeking me out. I think that over my career, the most successful projects that I've had have been embarked upon because the artist knew my work and wanted me to be a part of their next project. So I do approach and try to pursue some things, but the things that tend to work out the best are when the band seek out me.
So I have some words sent in here. This is from Kevin Dietz, whom you know. He might have worked with you on Silverchair, but for sure he's worked with you.
Dietz has worked on a bunch of stuff with me.
Yeah.
The Placebo,
Circus Survive, Stone Sour. Yeah. So this is what he has to say. I spent a lot of time assisting Dave on recording sessions and mixes. I've learned an immense amount from him in the process. I learned the importance of being organized, attention to detail, keeping a session moving, and being decisive, while still keeping the environment creative and accommodating towards the artist. I'm very grateful for the high-level experience and mentorship I've gained from working with Dave. So that's from Kevin.
Kevin's become a great producer, engineer himself. So, he's long surpassed anything I could ever teach him. And I'm sure I could learn a few things from him.
And you were kind enough. I had him as a special guest on the podcast a few months ago. You were kind enough to send in some nice words for him. So I'm just checking at the time here. We have about a half hour left. There's still so many artists. We want to get to your charity. So maybe I'll just run through a few of these. So you worked with Godsmack in 2003. We have Coheed and Cambria, Stained. So Stained is one of my all-time favorite bands. Just all-time favorite. Love those guys. What was it about Stained that made you want to work with them for Chapter 5 in 2005?
Again, I didn't really know a whole lot about Stained when they first approached me, but it was from the music that they sent me, and I thought, oh, okay, this is really good. I'll love to be a part of this. And so we actually made the record. Laugh. They didn't want to leave Springfield, Massachusetts, which is where they were. So they said, can we build a little studio up here and work up here? And I said, yeah, well, let's see. So it turns out that the drummer in the band was good friends with a landlord that owned a big warehouse building, and they were using the top floor as their rehearsal space, and we could build a studio up there. But it was actually the entrance to a strip club that we had to go through in order to get up to the studio. It was on the third floor, so we'd have to go in the morning with the strippers as they're entering for their day shift, and we'd walk up the stairs and go and make music in the studio all day, and then come back down at night and walk back through the strip club to go out to dinner or to go leave, go back to the hotel. So it was a very interesting experience.
A little bit of extra entertainment there at the start and the end of the day.
You know what? No, because I don't know if you think there's any kind of glamour that goes on in a strip club. Do not ever walk into one in the daytime with the fluorescent lights on.
Oh man, that might be the best advice you've given all day today on this interview. That's funny. So that album had some of the band's most beloved songs, like Right Here and Everything Changes. Can you give the Stained fans any insight on the recording of those two songs? Is there anything that stands out in the studio for those songs?
Well, I think I mean the guys in the band, great musicians, of course. Mushak would work very, very hard again on his guitar parts, and we would work a lot with him getting things just feeling just right. It's more about feel than it was necessarily about exactitude, but just getting the feel right. And I know that Aaron called some of the other singers that I had worked with before, and they warned him that I would make him sing more than once or twice. So I like to get the performance right. I like to make sure that the intention that the singer has is getting out there. So I would make him sing a lot. And then other singers, in fact, called him when they wanted to work with me, and he said, yeah, he'll make you sing a lot. So, they unfortunately, the way that we had the studio, we just had like a whisper booth for him to sing in. So I don't think it was a very pleasant environment. That's sort of a regret of mine, in that we didn't, like with Corey Taylor, we set up like this kind of yurt in the middle of the studio, and he was able to kind of have his like environment in there. With Aaron, unfortunately, all we had was this whisper booth, and it was pretty small, and so it probably wasn't really pleasant to sit in a lot of the time. So I can understand it'd be frustrating to have to sing a lot in an environment that you're not really that comfortable. So that was probably a failing on my part to not make an environment that was more conducive, but we got great performances out of him. So, we would sit in the studio a lot, and, he was looking for, writing lyrics, and he was always, kind of looking for inspiration. So we'd sit in the control room, and if he wasn't sure on something, we'd chat, we'd just sing, and he'd maybe pull some phrases of what we were talking about, and sort of work that way in writing some of the lyrics at the time. So he loved to shock Aaron. He was, he's kind of got this sort of slightly libertarian streak to him, and he came in one day, and he knows my position on firearms. I'm not a big fan. And anyway, he came in, showed up with his Glock in his back pocket, and just sort of put it on the table. I was like, I'm going to go sing now. And it's all for show. It's all for kind of make me have a reaction to it. Where I was like, why are you bringing that thing in here for? Anyway, he likes to do that. He likes to provoke, likes to shock, likes to say things that are provocative. So yeah, but they were great sessions. They were fun guys to be around and work with.
I find that, man, Mike has so many badass riffs and catchy licks. I find Mike to be underrated as a guitarist.
Yeah.
And then on the drum side, I find that John has a way of creating hooks with the drums. Like, he does this thing with his hi-hats sometimes where the hi-hats are creating this hook. Like, he does it in It's Been a While, and that's not on that album, but just an example of his playing. Did you find him to be unique as a drummer at all? It seems like he's able to add extra hooks with his drums.
Yeah, he does that. He does write in very interesting parts that do have memorable moments to them. So yeah, I mean, they were all great musicians. They're all played in really interesting ways. The bass player, Johnny, is funny. He would he played this one gig, I think, years before, after having like a salami sandwich. So when he would play in the studio, he had a little bag of salami, and to get his fingers slippery, he would put his hand in the bag of salami and then play the bass. It's a little bit weird for me, but it's like, whatever gets you the best sound and makes you feel comfortable, that's fine.
That's amazing. So you did I got my Coheed and Cambria shirt on here. You worked with Coheed in 2005. Long album titles: Good Apollo and Burning Star. 4, we'll just leave it at that. There's a longer title that continues there. Yep. So that was a huge, major breakthrough for them. And we have a question sent here from a fan. This is from Cam Hudson from Montreal. He says, this particular album features 2 of their most commercially successful singles of all time in Welcome Home and The Suffering. Did you know those 2 songs would be big hits and would stand the test of time when you were mixing them?
I thought every project that I work on, when you get to know the material, you believe in it. So I'm always thinking that about projects that I work with. And I think, The Suffering, I thought that was an amazing song. And Welcome Home too, I thought these could be huge, but you never know whether they really are. And it's a lot of it's about timing. When you release something, it's either got good timing or bad timing. I mean, when when Silverchair released Diorama, their audience wasn't ready for it, so it wasn't as much of a success. And in the same breath, the label didn't really, I don't think, supported it as much as they could have. I know Daniel got sick and he wasn't able to tour it, but all these things, all this music comes out, and timing is huge in that. Sometimes the world is looking for, the song that you're putting out. Sometimes they're not. So yeah, I always believe in the music that I'm working on. Whether it's released at the right time or whether it becomes successful is down to things that are generally out of my control.
I just listened to the album again in its entirety last night with a good pair of studio headphones. I think you did an amazing job mixing that album. And if we take Welcome Home, for example, the acoustic intro and the band kicking in, the guitar solos, it's like they're panned left and right, and it's like they're 2 guitars that are dueling. I don't know if it's one guitarist or 2 guitarists, but they're dueling. And then at the end of the song, where the instruments fade out, but the strings continue, like there's just a lot of, it's not just a great song, it's I find that some of the mixing actually adds to what makes that song great. What kind of memories do you have when you think back to mixing that song? It must have been a fun one to do with all the cool parts in it.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, it sort of leans into the way that I think about this kind of music, is that you're taking the listener on a journey. And if you've got these parts, you've got these different moods that you can feature and highlight at different times, you're able to take the listener on a journey, and you're able to have them come along with you both compositionally and sonically. So that record sort of was very much in the vein of how I like to hear music and how I like to mix music.
So in 2012, you mixed the Smashing Pumpkins album Oceania. Hopefully I'm not butchering all these album names. And I hadn't been listening to the Smashing Pumpkins in a while. And I remember that album coming out. I didn't have huge expectations. And I remember being blown away that it was, I thought it was one of their best albums in a long time. And critically, it was considered a return to form for the band. The album sounds great. I guess my question is, when you're just mixing an album for a band, do they show up in the studio and are there for the mixing and have their input, or do they just kind of get the final product? You say, what do you think? And they go, oh, I'd like guitars louder here and there. Or is it different for every band?
It's normally different, but these days, especially when I mix at home, people tend to send things to me, and I send back my first draft, get revisions from them, and we refine it from there. With the case of both Elegy and Oceania, I went to Billy's studio in just outside Chicago, and in fact, the Oceania was so much fun because it was still on tape. The guitars were on tape. The drums and bass were on, or no, I think the bass was on tape. The drums were on Pro Tools, and I think some keyboards were on Pro Tools, but all the guitars were on tape. Now, he didn't have a console big enough for all those inputs. So we actually had an old EMI console for a very old kind of Beatle-y sound for the drums on one track. We had a Neve console. We had a Trident A-series console around behind me. And then we had a Helios that we kind of put it all into. Now, this is a totally analog, totally performance mix thing. So there wasn't any recalling. And I said to Billy at the beginning, I said, look, if you want me to mix this way, I'm happy to, but know that we're not going to be able to do a recall where, we just tweak one little thing and then print it again. It's not going to be exactly the same because I'm performing it as we go. In fact, I had to turn switches on and off because of the noise levels of everything. So it was really full on. I was able to bring things down into subgroups. So I had a little set of 24 subgroups that I could mix with, but that was it, right? It wasn't as easy to sort of do a full on recall. Billy said, I never do recalls. He said, if I don't like the mix, I'll just do it again. So I thought, okay, this is good. So I started off the mix. I built the first song and I got it done. And I printed it. It was all printed down onto 1/2-inch tape. And so I did the mix and I brought Billy in and I said, come and listen to see what you think. This is the first project that we'd done together. And he listened. He's like, yeah, it's pretty good. I don't know. There's kind of something missing, in a certain area. And I said, and I thought maybe the guitar solo was maybe a bit loud. And I turned to him and said, well, do you think maybe the guitar solo is a bit loud? And he looked at me without a shred of irony and said, guitar solo was never too loud.
That's such a Billy Corgan thing to say.
Exactly. So anyway, it ended up just being like, you know what? Let me do another pass. So I did another pass, and I basically took the rhythm guitars and the body of the guitars, filled them out, and brought them up a little bit. And he brought them back in. He's going, yeah, that's my band, great. And that was it. That was the essence of it. And every other mix I did, there was maybe one or two little things, but he was very happy with it. And actually, in the last sort of 20 years, it's one of my most fun mixing projects to ever do.
It sounds complex with all the different equipment.
But it was great. It was a lot. It was so much fun because it was really, these days, I don't get to do performance mixes that much, because bands always want to have, okay, well, or labels or whoever. Yeah. Can you do that again? But turn the vocal up here between bar 25 and 35 up by 2 dB, and then, brighten this at this point. It's like, okay, but so you don't get to have that just sort of vibe kind of performance mix going on. I understand it from the standpoint, and I have, my mixing studio is, you can see it's not full of consoles and faders and stuff like that, because you just end up getting the requests from clients to do minute detail changes. So you have to do it in the box.
So we're up to Stone Sour in your discography, House of Gold and Bones, part 1 and part 2. It's crazy. It's already been a decade. It feels like those albums didn't come out that long ago. Did you guys know from the start that this would be a 2-part project?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. It was booked out as being that thing. So. And
they were going to be a year apart that they were released, or?
That they were released. Yeah. We recorded it all at the same time.
Oh, okay. See, that's stuff that we don't know as fans.
Oh yeah, no, we recorded the whole project all and mixed it all in one. They mixed it down in one go.
So we have a fan question. So this is Cam Hudson from Montreal, who sent in the question about Coheed. So he had a 2-part question. Corey Taylor seems to change up his voice from one project to the next so that each one is distinct. What was it like working with such a powerhouse vocalist? So pretty open-ended question.
Corey's amazing. Corey, Corey's neck is really thick, right? And so he's got power in his vocal cords, really strong power and incredible passion. I mean, his backstory is amazing, right? That he's homeless for some points in time. People in his life have come and gone in terrible ways. And I mean, he's a remarkable human being to have come out of, the world that he has and to be as strong. I loved working with him. He was a joy, just as a person, to be around and to work with. And like I said, in the studio, we set him up like it was like a big tent, but we called it his yurt, and he had the whole environment inside was all set up. It was for isolation, but it was also for, creative an environment that he's happy with.
So someone else that's worked with Corey Taylor is producer Jay Rustin, also worked with Coheed and Fall Out Boy. He says, David is an amazing producer and a great guy. We finally met in person and we clicked immediately.
Yeah,
that's
Jay's awesome. Yeah, great guy. And he did a great job on that mix of that album for sure.
So we're coming up to the last 15 minutes. We're going to dive into Make Music Matter. I had 3 more artists. I had Rush, The Tea Party, and Mastodon. You had touched on Mastodon a little bit. It's crazy. When that album came out, it was on like 14 different best of the year lists, like super critically acclaimed. I think the band as a whole is one of the most critically acclaimed metal bands of the last while. Again, super talented musicians, crazy time signatures. I guess I would ask a question about mixing.
Great human beings too.
Okay. That's the stuff you don't always hear,
No, super people, really great people. Yeah. They become good friends, which is nice.
So with Rush, so you remix the album Vapor Trails. I'm curious, how do you have constraints when you're remixing an album versus just mixing an album? Do you have to listen to the original to have a set point to move from?
No, I don't like to do that. I don't want to recreate that. I would just end up trying to recreate the other mix for the most part. No, in that case, so it was an interesting story. When I first moved back to Toronto, was when they were doing that work for that album. That was just after Neil's family had passed away, and he'd been on his sort of 2-year self-reflection motorcycle trip. He was getting back into writing and playing, and they sort of said, well, they called me up and said, will you come down and listen, maybe do some work with us? And I came down to the studio and we sat in for the day, and they said, would you do this with us? And I said, well, how long do you think you're going to want to work? They're like, yeah, Neil's just kind of getting back in this. We're probably going to be doing this for a year. And I thought, well, I can't really commit a whole year to one project. So I said, look, let's talk maybe later in the year and see where you're at. And maybe if you want me to dive in. That didn't happen in the end, which is fine. It didn't bother me at all. But they mixed it at the time where it was right kind of in the height of the volume wars. And so it was very heavily limited, very compressed, very little dynamic in it. And a lot of the fan base weren't happy with it. The band weren't really happy with it, the mix of it. And so this went on, amongst nowadays you have it back in the old days, you'd never have that kind of review of something, but social media is a thing, and their fan base always wanted it to be remixed. So they got a hold of me and said, look, ironically, 10 years after we didn't do this album together, would you like to remix it? So I said, sure. And I did. And there was very little restriction. They weren't over at my studio. They just said, here, take the material and have a go. So I did, and they were very happy with it at the end. I mean, we took, one song and did it, and they had revisions, but just the general tone of it, they were like, yeah, this is great. We love this. So, there was sort of all kinds of conspiracy theories online about, well, the recordings were bad and they had to re-record solos and re-record everything. It's not the case at all. I got the material and it all sounded great. It's well recorded. It was just mixed in a way that was consummate to the time. And the history has shown that people prefer things with a little bit more breathing space, a little bit more dynamic. So I just did a mix like that. And the fan base, I think, is generally happy with it. Rush fans are also extremely passionate, so you're going to get feedback. I got probably, I'd say, 80% Rush love and 20% Rush hate. So
that's pretty good when it comes to Rush and their diehard.
I thought it was a fairly good ratio. Yeah, I saw some comments of people hating it, and I saw lots of comments of people loving it. So I'll take it.
Since 2009, you've been on the board of directors for Make Music Matters. For people listening to this podcast that they're hearing about this charity for the first time, can you just share a little bit more about what that is and why it's important?
Sure. So at Make Music Matter, we use the creation of music to help marginalized communities and individuals. So what that essentially means is we set up recording studios in various parts of the world, and our flagship is in the Panzi Hospital in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's a civil war going on, and people use rape as a means of control. So there are a lot of women that come to Panzi Hospital, which was set up by the Nobel laureate, Dr. Denis Mukwege, for reconstructive surgery for the women that have suffered this gender-based violence. These women come get their surgery, then come in groups to our studio, and they start talking about their experiences. We have a music producer and a therapist, and this goes for all the sites we have all around the world. They come in and they talk about their situation. The producer has some music going on in the background, some original chord progressions and some rhythms. They start talking about the situation. They start writing these songs. They believe that they're just here to write some songs. The therapy gets kind of put in under the radar. They're able to sing and record these songs, and they write these things. They become advocates for their situation. Their songs are professionally recorded and mixed, and then we release them out through Warner Music Canada all over the world, and particularly back into their local communities. So not only do they become world advocates, they become local advocates for their situation. They were able to bond with the children that are often born out of these rapes in this particular situation. We treat them essentially not as patients, but we treat them as true artists. So we have a record label and a publishing company where any revenues, and not really very much revenue, gets generated because these aren't, really pop songs or super popular, and we don't promote them as much other than through our charity. But the reality is that the healing of trauma that comes from this process is better than anything else that's been tried in most situations around the world. And our model is able to heal trauma however it's generated. So we're moving into Indigenous communities in Canada. We have sites with children with disabilities in just outside Aleppo, out of Syria. It's actually in Gaziantep, which is in Turkey, just on the other side of the border. We're working with the educational system in Peru, so kids there. We've worked with child soldiers in the past. We've worked with men, women, boys, girls. This program heals trauma like nothing else. And we've had every program we go through has scientific metrics where we interview, we find their levels of trauma, we find their levels of anxiety and PTSD before and after the program. And it comes back every time from specialist and peer-reviewed studies. Nothing works like this. So we work all over the world with different communities and different groups. We hire local producers, local therapists. So it's not here comes Western culture to kind of save you. No, we work with people on the ground, and we vet all the people that work in our organization from the local communities. So it's the local community supporting and helping the local community.
And this is really important stuff. You're clearly passionate about it. There's a big list of popular musicians that have, lent their support to the cause, including Ian Thornley of Big Wreck, The Tragically Hip, Alex Lifeson of Rush, Billy Talent, Sum 41, The Trues. How much does it mean to you that these musicians have supported the cause?
Well, it means the world, these musicians know what the healing power of musical creation does, right? They just know that intrinsically. So it's almost, in a way, it's easy to sell it to them. It's harder to sell to people around the world who think, well, you're just sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya. It's not that at all. It's actually scientifically based in how we're able to heal the trauma and do things like, so in the case of the DRC, a lot of the kids that are born out of this, they won't get accepted by the mothers because it's a terrible traumatic memory, right? So they'll be shunned, they won't be fed properly, they won't be educated properly. They'll often be targets for militias to come around, turn them into child soldiers to then go back, destroy their own village, and create and perpetrate the same atrocities that ended up that started their own life. So if you can break that cycle through this program, and we have teams, I think we're almost up to 100 mixing engineers now that we send all of these songs that come in, and they get mixed properly and released through that. So it's not just like poor recordings and cheap mixes. We get top professionals to work on these things, and the music gets produced as well as anything. And we're able to do things like stop the cycle of rape victim into child soldier into atrocities happening around the world, plus helping communities around. We're looking at working with the Canadian healthcare industry in the Alzheimer's community, right, and trying to help work there. We all know how much music means to people who are going through dementia, or there's just a multitude of ways that what we do can apply to trauma, however it's generated. So yeah, we're partners. Again, I know I'm sort of giving a scattershot thing, but we're partners with World Vision, which is the largest charity in the world. So we work through their infrastructure to reach communities that need our help. And having the support of musicians like Alex, like Ian Dessa and Colin McCaslin, from Sum 41, Ian from Billy Talent, and all the guys in the Trues, and just having those support means so much to us because it validates the truth of what we're doing.
So, man, for our listeners that are inspired by what they're hearing, those that want to support, those that want to donate, how can people donate?
And go to our website at www.makemusicmatter.org. So Make Music Matter, and there's a donate button there. You can read about what we're doing, where we are around the world, and how we're expanding.
Perfect. So to wrap up, I have two questions. These are a little bit deeper, more about life than music. We've covered all the music we can today. David, what do you think is the meaning of life? What is the point of all of this? I'm sure with what you've just said about the charity, that's a big part about, if you find success, you should find a way to give back to those that could use a helping hand.
I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you enjoy the ride and try to leave the room cleaner than when you left. Sorry, try to leave the room cleaner than when you got there, or, it's cliched, I know, and it's BS, but, if you can help to make the world better, and like the world has gotten better since I was born, the world is a better place, demonstrably. We have, more comfortable lives in the Western world for the most part. We have more comfortable lives. We have better healthcare. We've got, our lifespans are longer. We're healthier throughout it. We're still learning, but things are generally better than they've ever been. That doesn't mean we don't want to keep making them better, and we keep wanting to contribute to make things better. So yeah, clean your room, but enjoy the ride.
Final question. If you could go back in time and you could sit down next to your 10-year-old self, so you have cute little David Bottrill sitting beside you.
I don't know how cute I was.
If you could give some words of advice with all these years you've had of experience, triumphs, failures, mentorship, what advice do you pass on to 10-year-old David Bottrill to help him along the way?
Don't be afraid to ask, I think. don't be afraid to acknowledge what you don't know, and don't be afraid to ask for what you want, I think is what I would say. Too many times in life, you try to fake it through. I know I have, like, oh yeah, I know that. And then you don't, or, I really want this, but I'm too afraid to ask. All people can do is say no. And I think people will respect you more when you're honest about what you're ignorant about and what you do know and what you want to learn. The great thing in what I do is it's been a nonstop exercise of learning new things and meeting new people and learning, what makes them tick and what, from a musical standpoint, what people write and how to kind of help with that. So I'd say just don't be afraid to ask the questions that you don't know, and don't be afraid to admit that you don't know something.
So we've covered a ton over the last 2 hours. Is there anything we missed that you just have to share? Just has to be shared to our listeners. Anything that has to be said?
I don't know. I think we've covered quite a lot. I can't think of anything in particular. Yeah, I
Perfect.
think just take notes. I think is whenever I'm uncertain about something, I take notes. I don't always go back and read them, but yeah, take notes.
They're there if you need them. So where can our listeners find you online? So you mentioned makemusicmatter.org if they want to support the charity. And then if someone wants to reach out to you and say, hey, loved the interview on the podcast, or I'm a big fan of this album, or they want to work with you, is there a website for you, or on Instagram? Yep. Where do they go?
davidbottrill.com is the website. So info@davidbottrill.com. Or there's you can reach it through, there's a contact button on the website. I'm on Instagram. I'm on my David Bottrill official Facebook business page is up there. I don't generally use Twitter that much other than for complaining about hockey. But
that's the right way to use it, though.
Yeah, complaining about the Leafs. Although they won last night. They did a great job last night. But anyway, I am on Instagram, David Bottrill Official as well. So you can. I generally try to redirect people through to the website because it's got a form to fill out with, places to put your music. If you're interested in working with me, that you put your music on, say what you want, what you're looking for, that kind of thing. So davidbottrill.com and, David Bottrill Official, Instagram, Facebook.
Awesome. So David, I wanted to take a second to really thank you for your time. Again, you were on my Mount Rushmore of guests that I would like to have on. It's such an honor to sit down with you as a huge music fan, as someone with a background in audio engineering. Your career is what is possible out there that can inspire people. And, if you didn't make all the albums you made, my life would be a lot different. I would be listening to MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice and Backstreet Boys. So you've created the soundtrack to my life. We're
all talented in their own right.
They are. I know, but I'm making a point here. You know what I'm saying?
Sure, I get
so I really wanted to thank you. I know you're a busy man and it means the world to me. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Joel. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. To our listeners, to our David Bottrill fans, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'd love to hear from you guys. My goal is to grow this podcast organically, where you're giving me feedback on topics you'd like me to cover and guests you'd like me to interview. You can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel, and on Twitter at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.